যদি সবাই ফিরে যায়, ওরে ওরে ও ভাগা সবাই ফিরে যায়, যদি গহন পথে যাওয়ার কালে কেউ ফিরে না যায়, তবে পথের কাটা তুই রক্ত মাখা চরণ তলে একলা দলরে, তুই রক্ত মাখা চরণ তলে একলা দলরে, যদি তোর ডাক শুনে কেউ না আসে তবে একলা চলো রে। যদি আলো না ধরে, ওরে ওরে ও ভাগা আলো না ধরে, যদি ঝড় বাদলে আধার রাতে দুয়ার দেয় ঘরে, তবে বজ্রানলে আপন বুকের পাঁজর জ্বালিয়ে নিয়ে একলা চলো রে, আপন বুকের পাঁজর জ্বালিয়ে নিয়ে একলা চলো রে, যদি তোর ডাক শুনে কেউ না আসে তবে একলা চলো রে। একলা চলো, একলা চলো, একলা চলো, একলা চলো রে।
Hi guys, thank you for joining the live stream. I hope the audio is coming fine. So today we'll do a quick short paper by Declan Quigley, the legendary social anthropologist who has quit academia to do body minding, a sort of a yoga slash I think massage kind of a workout in the beaches of Spain from University of St. Andrews originally. So this paper tries to debunk even the very idea that there at all are ladders in the caste system where the Brahmin priest sits at the top and other people go in the bottom rungs. And he says that it doesn't matter what the Hindus themselves say. They often say that there is no caste system. They often say there is no ladder. Then they often say that no, there is a ladder and the Brahmin is at the top, because of course there's no united, unanimous one decision. It's not that kind of a religion. So let's see what are his views here, because he is a as we would call him Manas Shishya. He is in the school of thought created by Hokart. So these people, Nicholas B. Dirks, Declan Quigley, all of these people have helped debunk the idea that caste is inextricably linked to Hinduism, and in fact they seem to appear everywhere. Tatvik is saying, mysterious sociologist is saying, আবার সালা কপিরাইট কেস খাবি, কি দরকার পুরোনো গান ইউজ করার। আমার ওসি গুলো কিছু হেভি কিছু বানানো নেই। It has to be heavy and it has to be energetic and it has to be short for a intro and outro. তো হাতের কাছে এইটা পেলাম, I found this lying around unused, unreleased, so I used this, but it's in a different rhythm from the original Akla Cholore. So let's see if this gets copyright, then I'll cancel this one as well. Let's start then. So this paper is called, it's from Springer magazine. Which year was this written in? 1997, the same year that Irfan Habib wrote that famous paper on caste, now famous paper on caste. Kingship and Contrapriests. This is the name of the paper, okay? Let's start. In 1967, Harold Gould published an influential article with the main title of Priest and Contrapriest. The article began by praising, quote unquote, for a sociology of, praising for a sociology of India, the essay with which Louis Dumont and David Pocock launched the journal Contributions to Indian Sociology in 1957. So remember, Louis Dumont is the guy whose views on caste are most popular in India, in political circles, journalist circles, academic circles, both left and right wing. Gould affirmed the quote-unquote essential unity of India and linked the idea of Indian society as a quote-unquote whole to Emil Durkheim's opposition of the sacred and profane, two domains which together provided, Durkheim believed, the entire field of religious concepts. Gould then assimilated this opposition by way of Claude Lévi-Strauss and Henry Orenstein to the cultural quote unquote code of caste values. The structure of this code, he asserted, was in terms of an opposition between quote unquote opposition between pollution, which is the involvement with life substance and process, and purity, the absence of biological involvement. This in turn was joined to the fundamental assumption of hierarchy in Hinduism, which we see clearly exposited in the work of Dumo and Pocock, and before them in Celestine Bugle, which also is debunked by Irfan Habib in that 1997 paper, saying that there's no mention of caste even in Rig Veda. To these ideas, which could be attributed to others, Gould added some observations of his own. One was, quote, that another underlying assumption of Hinduism is to regard the occupational role and the role occupant as being identical, which is natural to pre-industrial urban societies by contrast with industrial societies. Work roles are, to put it simply, regarded as being hereditary, end quote. It follows, he maintained, that work roles should then be subject to the same system of values as any other features which are inherited. Finally, according to Gould, the source of pollution is perceived by Hindus less as a matter of biological process per se than as deriving from quote unquote those aspects of the process which involve death, decay, waste, and evil. Out of this complex series of steps, Gould deduced that, quote, hierarchical or varna status is then determined by the degree of normal purity which a varna enjoys. He's going to debunk all this, by the way, okay? He's just setting up the premise. Determined by the degree of normal purity which a varna enjoys. Society, varna jati, is thus a series of oppositions between pure, sacred, and impure, profane, arranged in vertical hierarchical order, embracing corporeal man, Brahmin versus Kshatriya, Brahmin Kshatriya versus Vaishya, twice born, Dvija versus once born, touchable versus untouchable, etc. End quote. He then goes on to develop an individual argument on in the context of so-called Jajmani relations, where he sees the Brahman dispensing ritual purity down through the caste hierarchy, while grain is dispensed up as payment for this. How the much this is related to religion, also debunked by Sumit Guha in the paper we discussed, written by him. Awesome paper. In order for for those of you who are joining for the first time our live streams, we just created a separate playlist for just our caste discussion papers. We have discussed 21 papers so far in 20 live streams, because last day's live stream had 2 papers discussed regarding Japan. So this is the 22nd paper we are discussing on just caste. Top-notch credentialed academics, social anthropologists, researchers writing on caste from all the most credentials and legit institutions all over the world. Harvard, Helsinki, St. Andrews, Yale, etc. All of them. Stanford, University of Texas, JNU. In order for the Brahman priest to perform his rituals, he must be free from pollution, and a range of specialists, barbers, sweepers, washermen, and so on, ensured this. These specialists he terms contrapriests, and they allegedly dispense ritual purity upward in exchange for grain dispensed downward. I do not intend to discuss these supposed upward and downward exchanges for the simple reason that I do not believe that transactions in caste organized communities do in fact follow this pattern. It is in any case unclear how the absence of something can be transmitted. Purity is the absence of pollution, not some kind of substance. It is in any case unclear how the absence of something can be transmitted, because purity is the absence of pollution and not some kind of substance. What I do want to discuss is the simple conclusion which Gould comes to regarding the relative positions of priestly castes. Quote, priest and contrapriest are absolutely opposed. They lie at the opposite extremes of the social hierarchy. They are mutually exclusive, and this is symbolized by the fact that the ritual benefits they disburse and the remunerations they receive move always in opposite directions. End quote. Some variant of this picture is present in nearly every representation of caste and is normally taken as axiomatic, a starting point, which is that Brahmins are held to be at the quote-unquote top because they are priests, and priests are pure. Untouchables are held to be at the bottom because they deal constantly in impurity. The most articulate theory of why caste systems, or more usually the caste system, should look like this was, of course, put forward by Dumo in Homo Hierarchicus in 1980, which I have discussed in detail elsewhere in papers that we have discussed already. One need not delve into the theoretical complexity of Dumo in order to appreciate the straightforward fact that virtually all depictions of caste are as a ladder with the most pure at the top and the least pure at the bottom. On the other hand, as Gould's paper makes particularly clear, the simple conclusion that castes are arranged along a purity ladder is built up on a series of deductive steps which take rather a lot as just given or even as natural. Indeed, it would appear that the conclusion is merely a reworking of the initial axiom on which the argument is based, which is for Gould, as for the great majority of commentators on caste, Brahmins and untouchables are obviously polar opposites, obviously polar opposites, because many untouchables deal in impurity and Brahmanas, as it seems to them, do not, as it seems to Gould, they do not deal in impurity. Moreover, Hindus themselves will usually say when asked that Brahmanas are the quote unquote highest caste and untouchables the lowest. So it would be odd, even perverse, to argue most academic observers argue that. So it would be odd, even perverse, argue most academic observers, to begin with an alternative premise, which Declan Quigley does with a lot of courage. In this paper, however, I want to propose that such an alternative must be sought because the concepts of highest and lowest are profoundly deceptive when talking about caste, whatever Hindus themselves often say. And in fact, they also usually say something else quite different. Exactly. The perils of the ladder-like representation can be seen in a number of ways. Here I will try to demonstrate one of them by looking at the range of priests documented by Robert Levy in Mesocosm, 1990. Chapter 10 and 11, which is easily the most complete description available of the gamut of priestly castes for any Hindu settlement. For Levy, and it is difficult to disagree, the archaic royal city of Bhaktapur shows Hinduism in its most complete social expression, with the entire panoply of castes being represented. Levy's portrayal of the priests of Bhaktapur. Where is Bhaktapur? Throughout Mesocosm, Levy operates with a picture of the caste order which is at once conventional and unconventional. On the one hand, he eschews the word caste for the most part, preferring to group Bhaktapur's lineages, the Thars, into what he calls macrostatus levels. Yes, guys, castes are in the end just status groups. Though he calls them macrostatus levels in order to avoid the pre-Christian bed of generalizing terms, though he is selective about this, which means he does fall into the trap sometimes. And also to avoid the well-known confusion concerning the way in which the vernacular jati maps into English concepts such as caste, subcaste, and caste cluster. English concepts. But the end result is the same as virtually every other representation of caste systems that one finds in the literature, which is a hierarchical ladder with purity attaching Brahmins at the top, impurity attaching to untouchables at the bottom, at the quote-unquote bottom. Bhaktapur is in Nepal, acha. And Levy is comfortable enough with describing Bhaktapur as a typical Hindu caste system. The novelty in Levy's depiction of the social arrangement of Bhaktapur's Thars derives from the introduction of what he sees as two different realms, which is that of civic dharma, ranging from Brahman to untouchable, whose central organizing metaphor is purity and impurity, and another ranging from king down via farmers through the lowest status craftsmen, okay, क्योंकि कुछ ना कुछ काम का high status होगा based on how important that job or that service is in society, and किसी का low status होगा. So, ranging from king down via farmers through the lowest status craftsmen who deal in power and not in norms and values. This axiom is based on power. They perform secular functions. Levy argues that the kingly realm has its own extramodal or tantric deities and is concerned with the world of physical events, a world of rain and drought, disease and cure, earthquake and war. This quote-unquote realm of force, he says, transcends the realm of values and norms, of dharma, of purity and pollution. Yet, simultaneously, he claims the kingly realm is put to service. The kingly realm is put to the service of civic values and norms and ensures their protection. This seems to me a rather gelded form of transcendence, and much of my discussion will relate to the nature of this gelding. Levy begins by repeating a common assertion among scholars of Hindu India that relations between kings and priests in South Asia differ from parallel relations in other societies because long ago in Hinduism, worldly power and otherworldly power were separated. Thus, it is argued The king became subordinated to the Brahman priest, who assumed control of religious functions and values. The most systematic defense of this theory, indeed the only systematic defense of it, is Dumont's Homo hierarchicus, and Levy hits the nail on the head by quoting Dumont to the effect that his theory of caste depends entirely on the premise that the king had, quote unquote, from the beginning left the highest religious functions to the priest. If this is not the case, as Dumont would be the first to admit, his theory of caste makes no sense whatsoever. If religious functions, highest religious functions are not left to the priest, and just the priest, or just the highest religious functions being left to the priest is not the case, then Dumont's theory of caste makes no sense whatsoever, and Dumont would admit it himself. This is what Declan Quigley is saying. While not disagreeing with such classic characterizations of the relation between king and priest, Levy argues that they nevertheless tend to obscure the nature of the king's realm. The Thars, nice, very interesting. While not disagreeing with such classic characterizations of the relations between king and priest, Levy argues that they nevertheless tend to obscure the nature of the king's realm. The Thars in this realm, he says, include the potters, farmers, traders, wood carvers, dyers, and so on, as well as the king and other political military functionaries. As citizens, their religion, like the king's, is the ordinary dharmic religion. But as material technicians, they are within the realm of force. But this formulation conceals the difficulty. It is quite true that there are occupations which are religiously blind to dharma, and the examples which Levy gives are as good as any. However, Levy is not talking primarily about these occupations themselves, but about the groups which supply the people who do these occupations. He's talking about farmers, not farmers in capital F, not farmers in small f, or potters in capital P, not potters in capital P, because it's the name of the entire group who hold that profession. About dyers, not dyers with small d, and so on. The distinction is crucial because not all potters are potters, not all dyers are dyers, just as not all Brahmins are priests. While the majority of untouchables perform occupations such as laboring, which are not in any sense ritually defiling. This is the genius of Declan Quigley. This is why we like Declan Quigley so much, and hope someday he comes back in the academia, and hope he is hired by the Indian government in India. At issue is a principle of kinship, which is quite independent of any perceived association of associated occupation. Okay. The problem here is the principle of kinship. Kinship, okay, not kingship. Kinship meaning familiarity, sameness. Kinship, which is quite independent of any perceived associated occupation. This can be seen, so consumption patterns. This can be seen clearly in the case of one Newar caste, the Shreshthas. The word Shrestha simply means the best and has no automatic association with any particular occupation. The majority of Shreshthas are landowners and traders, occupations which permit them to be the paradigmatic patrons of other castes. But one can hardly describe patronage as an occupation in the conventional sense. To be a Sreshtha is to be related to other Sreshthas, not to practice a particular profession, Sreshthi in India. As is also well known, it is entirely possible to have a caste with a traditional occupational name and yet no one in the caste performs that occupation. When Levy writes of potters or dyers or farmers belonging to the kingly realm, being in some sense like kings, he claims that this is a function of their occupation. But what about those farmers and potters who are shopkeepers or clerks or agricultural laborers? Their relations with others, particularly with regard to marriage and commensality, are determined not by their occupation but by their kinship. To be precise, their perceived kinship, what it comes across as, not the actuality, with their perceived kinship with other farmers and potters respectively. What if those farmers and potters who are not in the professions of being farmers and potters, what is the relationship like to actual farmers and potters? From the point of view of relations with others, it is the ritual tasks performed by individuals and their kin which are pertinent, and not their daily occupation. Thus, the person who, for example, fixes bicycles to earn his living may also play music on certain ritual occasions by virtue of belonging to a particular lineage or caste, and it is this function, even if it is performed rarely, which gives him a place in the overall scheme of things. If there is a kingly realm somehow running parallel to the dharmic caste order, it would appear to be, to use Dumont's term, encompassed by that order and not truly independent of it, even if this is how things are sometimes ideologically expressed. If there is a kingly realm somehow running parallel to the dharmic caste order, it would appear to be encompassed by that order and not truly independent of it, even if this is how things are sometimes ideologically expressed. And this is, I think, a very, very important point, because check this out. The person who fixes bicycles may be in a different profession at some point because of lineages and sometimes because of just profession, right? But if there is in fact a kingly realm which is running parallel to the dharmic caste order, then that kingly realm order, uh, that kingly realm is encompassed by the dharmic order, not independent of it. It is only possible to stand outside the caste order as uncontrolled individuals. Dumo was perfectly correct about this, as pillagers and barbarians, or as ascetics and gods. This is not to deny that the position of king is an ambiguous one, that he is simultaneously likened to a man inside society and to a god outside society. The kingship depends upon this ambiguity, because kings are real men from real kinship groups, yet the kingship must transcend the ordinary rules of kinship if it is to represent all the king's subjects. One can say equally that the Brahmana, that is the ideal representative of the Brahmana Varna, not the member of this or that Brahmana Jati, is caught between the world of the householder and the world of the ascetic, as has been so brilliantly explored by Veena Das in 1977 and Jan Histerman in 1985 in their respective textual exegeses. Through ritual, the illusion is given that that actual kings and actual Brahmans embody the ideal, but the paradox is that such rituals can only be performed with the participation of other non-transcendent members of the community in question. This represents a form of permanent trap in which society prevails over the ascetic and the gods and even over nature. The illusions of ritual are necessary illusions, because the legitimation of kingship and priesthood is based on the transformation of ordinary men and women into something else, overcoming mortality, degeneration, and other bodily and spiritual imperfections. Very true. But effectively, the illusion lasts only as long as the ritual does, and this is why rituals must be repeated again and again. Lasher, this guy's name is Declan Quigley. This is the fourth or fifth paper by Declan Quigley we are reading, and do check out our playlist called Caste Papers. There you'll find all our discussions on caste, phenomenal papers, all pretty much saying the same thing, which is not the commie view that Hinduism is absolutely evil because of caste system, and not the sort of the Hindutva 1.0 view that yes, we did casteism. Yes, our ancestors are kind of to be blamed for it, but the British started it, or the British didn't start it. It was inherently a distinctly Hindu flaw that happened only in India, etc. This is some different view completely. Declan Quigley was a researcher at University of St Andrews, of all places. Did his PhD from LSE. Let me take this question. Then why do our last names don't reflect a particular occupation, like the English occupation-based last names? Because caste is not that rigid. That is the point of Declan Quigley as well. But effectively, the illusion lasts only as long as the ritual does, and this is why rituals must be repeated again and again. Just like we will discuss caste again and again, and discuss Declan Quigley again and again, because new people are coming to our channel and finding these things out for the first time, especially since my summation of Irfan Habib's paper kind of went viral yesterday on Twitter. Returning to Levi, we can nevertheless agree that there is a resemblance between being a king, a farmer, a shopkeeper, and the like. The control over material sources which such occupations facilitate enable those who practice them to command others to perform rituals on their behalf. The concept of ritual is very important here. Yeah, I heard about the deep sea cap. The castes from which such patrons come tend to be thought of as secular or non-priestly, but there is something of a misapprehension involved here. Again, a very important part. We can nevertheless agree that there is a resemblance between a king, a farmer, a shopkeeper, and the like. Okay, there is something tying all these people. The control over material resources, which such occupations facilitate, enable those who practice them to command others to perform rituals on their behalf. The castes from which such patrons come tend to be thought of as secular or non-priestly, But there is something of a misapprehension involved here. Nearly all members of such castes, on some occasion or other, themselves perform priestly functions, either for members of other castes or for the community as a whole, or for members of other lineages within their own caste. Typically, so he's saying that all these people, king, a farmer, shopkeeper, and the like, all of them also have to end up performing a ritual or the other, sometimes for some reason perform priestly function. Nearly all members of such castes, on some occasion or other, themselves perform priestly functions, either for members of other castes or for the community as a whole, or for members of other lineages within their own caste, typically those to whom they are affinally related. Thus, among the Newars of the Kathmandu Valley, a member of the Maharjan Jiapu farmer caste is called upon in okay, a member of the Maharjan caste is called upon in some settlements to carry the funeral bier when a Shrestha dies. Maharjans also frequently perform in music groups at calendrical rituals on behalf of the whole community. And for all Newar castes, including the patron lineages, the mother's brother and father's sister have crucial ritual roles to play throughout the life cycle. One might argue that these functions are non priestly, but this would require a distinction between priestly ritual and non priestly ritual, which would be difficult to sustain for long. This is genius. He's not just pointing out, as he has done in other papers, that not all Brahmins are priests. He's in fact pointing out that other peoples are often priests as well. Holy shit. Um, Shekhar is saying that I come from the caste of emperors. Where is my reservation? We were the worst oppressed. No, no. If you came from the caste of emperors, why should you be oppressed? Unless you were oppressed by other kings who defeated your kings. Uh, this observation led Fraser to develop the first two theories of the king as scapegoat: the identification of the monarch's bodily perfection with the well-being of the kingdom and, by extension, the cosmos, implying that the king must be removed before his physical degeneration endangers the general welfare. Yogakshema. While some variation on this theme is reported from a number of African societies, it has perhaps received undue, rather sensationalist attention in the anthropological literature. Uh, Fraser's other scapegoat thesis, which strikes me as the mere interesting and more pertinent for the understanding of caste, is that the king is often held to embody the sins, evil, death, inauspiciousness of his people. He is a kind of dangerous, polluted vessel who must find some means of ridding himself of the contagion he absorbs, unless he is to imperil both himself and the kingdom. Because he kills people, he murders people for his profession. This second scapegoat notion is thus quite independent of the idea of the physical degeneration of the king, and in fact makes this idea somewhat redundant or irrelevant. These are the subconscious underlying principles of how society operates, according to Declan Quigley. Kings simply are repositories of inauspiciousness, death, and so on, whatever their health. Physical degeneration may be dangerous for the kingdom, but kingship itself seems to be inherently dangerous, even if the king is in perfect health. Typically, the rituals which surround the king, and of course, they are many, prolonged and elaborate, are designed to continually repurify the kingship by ridding the incumbent king of the danger he accumulates by virtue of his office. In other words, the only good king is a pure king. A dead king, an ancestor, could be made to fit this bill particularly well, as Hocart, that other great theorist of kingship, recognized when he wrote that, quote, the first kings must have been dead kings, end quote. But with a living king, such purity can only be attained for an instant through particular rituals, paradigmatically sacrifice. Now, this is a fun sentence, that first kings must have been dead kings. Yes, because only those dead people are considered that pure and that great. Once the ritual is finished, the king automatically reverts to his normal, everyday, dangerous state of absorbing inauspiciousness, and the ritual procedures of purification must be reactivated. At the heart of kingship, then, there is a paradox, which is the king must be pure, yet cannot be pure because of his profession. All our lands were stolen by other kings. Yes, yes. Then to you deserve reservation. Ab ka kare. Gotra is also considered for priestly jobs. Okay. Did you take Janeu? No. I was trolling people. At the heart of kingship, then there is a paradox. A king must be pure, yet cannot be. The impurity slash inauspiciousness which kings accumulate is held to derive from the physical facts of decay and death, from the fact that they are often killers or subjugators of other people, and from the simple generation of evil in the course of ordinary social life in the kingdom. For a review of pertinent literature on this subject with respect to South Asia, see Raheja's work from 1988. Much, perhaps all of royal ritual is given over to alleviating or obscuring this intractable problem of impurity of living kings. The awkward fact remains, nevertheless, that kings can only aspire to the perfection of kingship at ritual moments. Genius. The awkward fact remains, nevertheless, that kings can only aspire to the perfection of kingship at ritual moments, that is to say, outside normal time, which immediately pass, thus requiring the ritual paradigmatically involving sacrifice to be performed again after a while. The scapegoat nature of the king would appear to show that he does not and cannot evade moral responsibility and the civic world. Indeed, this is reflected in the last lines of a quote of a quote Levy uses from Robert Lingat's book, The Classical Law of India. Quote, if he is free to act as he pleases without having to account to anyone for his acts, he acquires merit only when acting in conformity with his dharma. So finally, the destiny of the king depends on the way in which he has been able to protect his subjects. End quote. Lasher, how can we promote Hindutva 2.0 in Bengal with great speed? Well, play our live streams on tableaus and giant screens all across the villages and towns and mofusils and cities of India, of West Bengal. Levy concludes from this passage that while the king must be guided by some sense of moral responsibility, as king, his emphasis, he must violate and transcend that responsibility. Yes. While king must be guided by some sense of moral responsibility, but as king, he must violate and transcend that moral responsibility. This I take to be the precise opposite of Lingat's intended meaning, and is the reason I have emphasized the word finally in the quote from him above. The violation and transcendence of ordinary morality are, as Levi asserts, essential to kingship, but only if they are hemmed in, even imprisoned, by the ulterior needs of the kingdom. The violation and transcendence of ordinary morality are, as Levy asserts, essential to kingship, but only if they are hemmed in, even imprisoned by the ulterior needs of the kingdom. Otherwise, how would one recognize a king as distinct from amoral ascetics and gods, on the one hand, or freebooters and pillagers on the other? In the end, kings too must conform if they are to remain kings, and any transcendence, whether godly or ungodly, must be circumscribed. We could state this as another formulation of the Fraserian paradox: the kingship must be transcendent, yet kings must serve mundane. Yes. Kingship must be transcended, the office of the prime minister, let's say. Yet the kings themselves must serve the mundane. Prime minister's office and the prime minister himself, the person, the prime minister, and the prime minister's office is not the same thing. Two reasons, Rishi. One, because many people who don't do sandhya at all also wear the janu. Therefore, other people are being robbed of it for no fucking reason. And secondly, because I believe janus are the markers of a researcher. And the Brahmins of yesteryears, when janu and being a Brahmin actually meant something, they were scholars of different kind. They were theologians, mathematicians, everything. And so today's degree holders, PhDs also should get a janu. And I'm in the field of research anyway, although I have not completed a degree of sorts. Therefore, I too deserve a janu. And if janus are not important, then why aren't Brahmins all quitting it anyway? So far, I have looked mainly at the king. Let me now consider Levy's two realms with relation to priests. According to Levy, Bhaktapur's priests in Nepal, including its Brahmanas, operate in both these realms, both as the exemplary pure and in fact exemplary pure, pure priests of the ordinary moral realm, the world of the dharmic, hierarchical, civic order, and also as priests of the realm of power, where purity and impurity and the civic values of interdependency are irrelevant. In these two worlds, the relations of Brahman to king, of priest to client, are basically different, and thus so is the meaning of the priest and his function, because proximity to power is the factor here. The Rajopadhyaya Brahman, Levi states, is at the top of both, quote unquote, top of both realms, in one manipulating purity and order, in the other, where purity is not at issue, manipulating through tantric deities the extramodal world of physical events, a world of rain and drought, disease and cure, earthquake and war. At the bottom, he says, we find the near untouchable Jugi and the untouchable Pod, or Pode, I don't know, Pod, whose great impurity is to some extent transcended by their capacity to relieve others of pollution. Their impurity is to some extent transcended by their capacity to relieve others of pollution. Perhaps the most striking feature of Levi's characterization of Bhaktapur's priests is the number of times he uses qualifying words to denote functionaries who are almost priestly but somehow fall short of the real thing. Number of times he uses qualifying words to denote functionaries who are almost priestly but somehow fall short of the real thing, who are experts who are not properly priests themselves. Thus, we have quasi-priests, auxiliary priests, and para-priests, as well as various pollution-manipulating priest-like functionaries, etc. These are the terms that have to be used, therefore. Similarly, the functions which these groups perform are also regarded as something other than, and usually in some way ideologically inferior to, those performed by fully fledged priests. They are enabling or act in lieu or are priest-like in one or another more or less covert way. They are priest-like. I do not wish to question for a moment the fact that there is an elaborate ritual division of labor in Bhaktapur, or that some ritual specialists are highly regarded while others are seen as despised, leading to a conception of their priestliness as covert. Nor for the most part do I want to question the depiction of the tasks which the various ritual functionaries perform. Levi's portrayal is exhaustive and, as far as I know, accurate. What I do wish to ask is whether the despised function is any less priestly in a comparative sociological sense than the function which is held in high regard, and whether the function which is held in high regard is not also inherently compromised. Nice. What I do wish to ask is two questions. The despised function, whether it is any less priestly in a comparative sociological sense than the function which is held in high regard. Okay? Brilliant observation. Because sometimes what is despised, even that is in a way priestly only, but that's a priestly despised work. And whether the function which is held in high regard is not also inherently compromised. Or to put it another way, I want to ask whether the Brahman and the untouchable, insofar as they represent their respective caste functions, not occupations, do not in fact occupy the same structural niche with respect to other castes and to the system, the quote-unquote system as a whole. This is the fucking genius of Declan Quigley. What a brilliant question to ask. You don't ask the best questions, you'll never get to the best answers. As we will see, the distinctions between the various kinds of priests tend to break down on a number of revealing occasions. This, I believe, has implications for the way in which one understands caste in general. Levi describes the hierarchy of priests as reflecting straightforwardly the hierarchy of castes. Macrostatus levels. The Rajopadhyaya Brahmins have a number of priestly functions. Firstly, they act as domestic priests to a wide span of unequivocally clean, quote-unquote, clean thars. One definition of being fully clean is precisely that a Brahman will serve as the thar's family priest. This tautology is unsatisfactory, and it would have been useful if we could have seen some other criterion of being clean. One reason it is unsatisfactory is the suggestion that the function of domestic priest for thars of this grade does not have pollution implications. Comparative material, particularly that of Jonathan Parry and Gloria Raheja, would suggest that all domestic priests, like all other priests, rid their patrons of inauspicious qualities through the performance of ritual. It is this process of transmission which makes priesthood so intensely compromising and indicates why members of Brahman castes will avoid this profession if they have the option, and why non priestly Brahmins tend to look down on their priestly cousins. This observation incidentally contradicts Gould's claim that, quote, dominant castes on the plains are never ranked higher, but indeed are always ranked lower than the Brahmins, except when the dominant caste is Brahman, but even then secular Brahmins are less pure than priests. Holy shit, end quote. Except when, listen to this sentence once again. Yeah, this actually contradicts that. In all discussions of this subject, one has to be careful not to be too literal or essentialist or western bound with the use of the word priest, a concept which we tend to associate with a person performing a specialized function which is marked in certain ways, such as prolonged training and special forms of behavior, speech, and often dress, which set him apart from ordinary people. But virtually anyone can perform the lightning rod functions of priesthood in caste organized communities. The expulsion of inauspicious qualities is made possible by passing them on to a variety of others who are normally ritual specialists of some kind, but who may also, if no such specialist is available or willing to accept them, they can also be affinal relatives. They cannot be lineal relatives because they are not by definition other. It has to be another. In any case, these castes which are clean are so only because periodically they employ members of other castes or affines to cleanse them, thus implying that something dangerous tends to accrue to them more or less automatically in the normal course of social life. It would also appear that the closer one is to the kingly center, the more one has to perform rituals of expiation. One authority has even suggested that service with a king is viewed as an abomination by proper Brahmins. Like some scholars, some academics would despise the fact that some other academics cozy up to the prime minister. According to Levy, Bhaktapur's Rajopadhyaya Brahmins do not have the choice of abandoning the priestly profession, and this would seem to indicate that they are stuck with an undesirable state. Equally, the fact that some Rajopadhyaya Brahmins work as temple priests, which is generally conceived to be a more dangerous occupation still, needs to be untangled further. Levy is more forthcoming on a separate group, the Bhatta Brahmins, most of whom work as teachers and professionals, while some are temple priests. They were taken from Karnataka to Nepal, I think, and these are the ancestors of Bhattacharyas of Bengal as well, who came with the Sena dynasty in Bengal. He notes an interesting equivalence between the Bhatta Brahmins and the untouchable Pod in one particular ritual context. These Pods are probably the Pondro Kshatriyas of Bengal, right? So, yeah, they used to be untouchable at one point. He notes an interesting equivalence between the Bhatta Brahmins and the untouchable Pod in one particular ritual context, which involves the patronage of Chathariya Thar known as Nakanda. Let's see. Quote, in certain Brahman conducted pujas held to cure illness and or misfortune thought to be due to bad planetary influences, a mixture of different kinds of grain are held to be head of the sufferer, held to the head of the sufferer, different kinds of grains. A mixture of different kinds of grain are held to the head of the sufferer. The families in this group then have the option of sending the grain to a pod untouchable, so that he may absorb the misfortune, which is what some families other than those in this particular group would do, or else send it along with valuable gifts to a Bhatta Brahman as an offering, a dana. It resembles in nature and function the offerings to lowest status thars. It resembles in nature and function, which are the resemblance to what? The offerings to lowest status thars, offerings that signal the inferiority and dependence of those thars, and which serve to transfer pollution, as is suggested in the option of choosing either a bhatta or pod here. Okay, लोएस्ट स्टेटस वालों को दे रहा है, वो पोद को भी दिया जा रहा है, वो ही भट्टा ब्राह्मण को भी दिया जा रहा है. This equivalence of pod and bhatta brahman here suggests the polluting implications of many priestly services and is typical of the situation of the auxiliary priests. But is it only characteristic of this particular class of priests? What a genius research. There is good reason, I believe, to replace Levy's many priestly services with all priestly services, as Parry has so powerfully argued. There are polluting implications for any rituals where gifts are exchanged, whatever those protestations are called. From Levy's account, the nature of transactions in rituals where Rajopadhyaya Brahmins officiate is left unexplored. This could be a very promising line of research, particularly because, unlike the typical scenario in India, members of Bhaktapur's Rajopadhyaya Brahmin lineages must actually work as priests. Levy's auxiliary priests, the Karmachari, are those who either help the Brahman in conducting rituals or who act in lieu of Brahmins in rituals or who work for clients where Brahmins can or will not officiate. These auxiliary priests, the Karmachari, are those who either help the Brahman in conducting rituals or who act in lieu of Brahmins in rituals or who work for clients where Brahmins can or will not officiate. The adjective auxiliary seems to me to be appropriate in only the first of these, which is where they help some other Brahman in conducting rituals. In the other two cases, he has his own hereditary judgments and replicates the activities of the Brahman priest, albeit in rituals which are held to be more dangerous or to categories of people of lower status than those for whom the Brahman officiates. Lower than those for whom the Brahman officiates. So these auxiliary priests should not be really called auxiliary. They have their independent lineage judgments, but they are performing rituals for those people who are too low in status than the people who would get the Brahmin's services directly. Structurally speaking, there is no difference between the functions performed, and it is surely very significant that the Rajapadhyaya Brahmins refer to the Karmachari as kinds of Brahmins. The same is said of the Tinis, who are regarded by the Rajapadhyaya Brahmins as probably fallen because of some irregular marriage. The Tinis being the Purohits of the families of a lineage known as Bha, described by Levy as borderline clean and having their own contaminating priest-like function, which is the receipt of death gifts. It is interesting that members of this caste are also sometimes referred to as Mahabrahmans or Great Brahmans. Dumo describes the Mahabrahmans of North India as untouchables of a particular kind, while Parry insists that they are, however, compromising their function, still Brahmans. Levy notes that the ritual function of the Bha is performed by Brahmans in other parts of South Asia on the death of people of very high status, but that it is such a compromising activity that it resulted in the exile from the community of the priest in question. In fact, one need not leave Nepal to see this procedure in operation. Parry, quoting E. Loishtag, writes the following concerning the funerary rites of the grandfather of the present king of Nepal. After the cremation of King Tribhuvana in 1955, the Mahabrahman lived in the palace for 13 days, sleeping in the king's bed, smoking the king's cigarettes, waited upon and taking what he wished of the king's possessions. The royal kitchens prepared what he desired, but the food was deliberately contaminated by a paste made from the bone of the king's forehead. Yeah, we discussed this in another paper by Declan Quigley. At the end of this period, he received, can you believe this? 8 food contaminated by a paste made from the bone of the king's forehead. Holy fuck. At the end of this period, he received rupees 10,000 in alms and gifts worth a further rupees 2 lakh, including 2 elephants and a richly caparisoned horse. Mounted on one of the elephants, he left for exile in India. ऐसा exile तो हम सबको चाहिए भाई. The people of Kathmandu and Thankot lined the road to stone him and jeer. क्या contradictions hai. I'm telling you, India is a steampunk society. As for the para-priests, among whom Levy includes the Joshi, the astrologers, and the now barbers, their job, he says, does not entail techniques of worship. Okay, the para-priests, among whom the Joshis and Nais are included, they do not entail techniques of worship. Rather, their function is preparatory one, ensuring that clients are in a fit state to participate in rituals where the other priests officiate. Because वो astrologer चाहिए होगा ठीक ritual के लिए, वो barber चाहिए होगा ritual के दिन बाल काटने के लिए, etc. To participate in rituals where the other priests officiate. Levy states that they are counted as para priests because their job is kind of priestly. but because it's not just any profession, random anyone cannot go and give astrological predictions and cut the hair of the king at that moment. So they are para priests. Levi states that the Joshi is like the barber who mechanically purifies people in a non-sacred procedure. But is this so in the case of either caste specialist? The fact that certain ritual functions are regarded as caste specific, only certain ritual functions are regarded as caste specific, is itself an index of the concept of sacred, which one gets from such comparative sociologists as Emil Durkheim and Mary Douglas. That is, the notion of setting apart. The description of the barber's cutting and paring as mechanical is akin to equating pollution with dirt, an equation we are not permitted to make because of the simple fact that these activities are culturally specific. The growth of hair and nails is, of course, mechanical, but the clipping of them on demarcated occasions is the opposite. This is not to say that barbers in Bhaktapur do not also cut hair and nails as a matter of routine, just as they do in the West. Even in these cases, however, given the cultural implications of respectability, one needs to be careful not to push the concept of sacred into too tightly sealed a box, remote from the ordinary or secular concerns of social life. Do not do that, then you will reach wrong conclusions. Shaptarshi, yeah, the name of the paper is Kingship and Contrapriests. Let me check some comments for a while, have a bit of water. What were you ranting about? Could you cite the title? Yeah. Shaptarshi, download and check out all our Declan Quigley papers because he has discussed these ideas many times, no? So it would be best if you go through all of them. This is the fourth or fifth paper by Declan Quigley we are discussing. And I today created a separate playlist for our caste paper discussions. He may have developed it into a book later on. Yeah, he has books on these topics. Contrapriest, what it is, that is the point of the paper. That is what we'll get to in the beginning, in the end, because so far he's setting up the premise that, see, so many scholars have called different priests auxiliary priests, para priests, and stuff. Declan quickly wants to create a framework for contra priests. It is also interesting that Bhaktapur's Rajopadhyaya Brahmins say that they could do the astrological work of the Joshis, but that they have delegated this function to them. The perceived indispensability of various ritual tasks indicates that if one particular group were unable to perform them for some reason, the activities would be absorbed into the repertoire of another, as Levy notes with regard to the existence of Brahman astrologers in other parts of South Asia. Very important. Bhaktapur's Rajopadhyaya Brahmins say that they could do the astrological work of the Joshis, but that they have delegated this function to them. The perceived indispensability of various ritual tasks indicates that if one particular group were unable to perform them for some reason, the activities would be absorbed into the repertoire of another, as Levy notes with regard to the existence of Brahman astrologers in other parts of South Asia. That some activities are seen as being significantly more compromising than others is of course true, but there is nevertheless something of an ideological smokescreen here. What is compromising is not being this or that kind of priest. All transactions in this world are inherently problematic. And the problem with prestations for ritual performances is not just one facing the contra priest or para priest. As Histerman so elegantly puts it, quote, the Purohita cannot be a proper Brahmin because he is stuck in the sphere of antithetical relations where he has to exchange his purity for the impurity of his patron. The only pure or uncompromised or proper Brahman is thus one who does not sacrifice for anyone but himself, that is, a renouncer. In practice, Brahmanas frequently say that the payments they accept for the performance of ritual, often referred to as dakshina, are quite different from the ritual payments accepted by others, commonly referred to as dana. But in the end, this is simply self-legitimation and ingenious contrivance for claiming that Brahmins are not really in the world as the mortals are. For Levi, the para-priests and auxiliary priests perform rituals for designated payments which would compromise a Rajopadhyaya Brahman were he to perform them, okay? These para-priests and auxiliary priests perform rituals for designated payments which would compromise a Rajopadhyaya Brahman if he performed them, okay? This is the important part. The para-priests and auxiliary priests are doing the stuff that the Rajopadhyaya Brahman cannot do. It's too polluting for even him. This is undoubtedly true, but still we do not know enough of the rituals which the Rajopadhyaya Brahmans themselves perform to be able to judge the extent to which these are also compromising an eventuality which seems given comparative evidence and the intrinsic nature of the Jajman-Purohit relationship to be inescapable. Conclusions. This is the end of the paper then. The alternative picture which I am suggesting here sees purity not as an essential attribute of priesthood but as a quality which derives from relations focused on kingship. It's all about proximity to power. Brilliant. In such a picture, the overriding concern is to keep the kingship pure or sacred by divesting it through periodical ritual of all inauspicious aspects. The people who make this possible we call priests, whatever their everyday occupation and whatever their caste affiliation. Different priests perform different functions, and some of these are seen as acutely more dangerous than others. But all of them share in the danger of absorbing patrons. All of them share in the danger of absorbing patrons' accumulated evil to a greater or lesser extent. If one begins with this premise, then it is better to change one or two labels. In the first place, it is confusing, indeed completely misleading, to refer to Brahmins as the highest caste. This is misleading for a number of reasons. We have seen that there are many different Brahman castes and a number who are kinds of Brahmins. All of these are endlessly disputing each other's status. Most interestingly, perhaps, with Manusmriti mein hai, to dispute kahe ka? All of these are endlessly disputing each other's status. Most interestingly, perhaps, with non-priestly Brahmins claiming precedence over Brahmins who follow the priestly profession. What the fuck? Clearly, then, it is not simply being a Brahman which is the deciding factor in allocating status, but some other criterion. Secondly, if priesthood is always a compromising activity, then it would be perverse to argue that some priests are higher than those who patronize their ritual services. This is not to argue for the equally unacceptable statement that patrons take precedence. As Hocart once put it, that the first caste is the one that provides the king. The relationship between kings and priests, between Kshatriya and Brahmana Varnas, is inherently ambiguous, and one must not resolve this ambiguity in favor of one party or the other, because Declan Quigley is an honest scholar. To argue, as I have done here, that purity is a concern deriving from relations focused on kingship is not to put kings on some higher plane. It is simply to point to the underlying sociological problem of political and ritual centralization, which is at the heart of caste organized community. Centralization requires that the rules of lineal kingship must be surmounted, okay? And it is kingship which is the primary institution through which this is manifested. Proximity to power. It is also misleading to refer to Brahmans or anyone else as the highest caste, because it suggests that it is possible to construct a league table of castes where purity points indicate each caste's relative position. No one has ever yet managed to do this in a manner which is acceptable to the representatives of all castes, okay? Which is acceptable to the representatives of all castes in any community in South Asia. Many have noted the fuzziness surrounding the order of castes in the middle caste, that is, castes which do not have a ritual function which gives them a clear position in relation to patrons or to each other, and yet have still attempted to argue that castes are always arranged along a more or less incontrovertible ladder. Here one should be mindful of the difficulties encountered by British colonial census makers. Herbert Risley, commissioner of the 1901 census, noted with frustration the problem with the census question asking for someone's caste, tribe or race. Quote, "No column in the census schedule displays a more bewildering variety of entries or gives so much trouble to the enumerating and testing staff and to the central offices which compile the results." कि कास्ट ट्राइब नाम देने जाओ तब पूरा कन्फ्यूजन का कन्फ्यूजन. वन ऑफ द मेन इसको 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 जोर से बाय फोर्स आर्टिफिशियली डिस्टॉर्टेड वे से फॉसिलाइज करके रिजिडिफाई करके अब रिजर्वेशन दिया जा रहा है. One of the main reasons for these difficulties was that members of many castes were not prepared to accept the place on the status ladder which census enumerators wished to allot them. Attempts to override these objections, whether by colonial administrators or subsequently by a succession of anthropologists, seem to be misjudged unless one sweeps aside certain inconvenient ethnographic facts. One might argue that the relative position of castes in Bhaktapur is, however, fairly unambiguous and is more or less as Levy presents it on pages 625 through 27 of Mesocosm in his table of Thars listed by status levels. In the other Newar settlements, which I know from my own fieldwork, there is a certain amount of dispute about status, particularly among the Chatharia and Panchtharia lineages, with many of the latter claiming that they are really of higher status. Colin Roser's famous 1966 paper would seem to indicate that the same applies to Bhaktapur. Moreover, Levy's unambiguous placing of the Rajopadhyaya Brahmans at the top of the status hierarchy ultimately depends on a rather unskeptical acceptance of the viewpoint of his collaborator, who comes from this group, and on the जो कि उसको information provide कर रहा है उसका बात ऐसे ही मान लिया, and on the omission of a detailed examination of the nature of rituals performed by this group. If, as has been argued, service with a king is an abomination because of the transmission of the king's inauspicious qualities along with gifts of some kind, then this puts the Rajopadhyaya Brahman, the king's Purohit, in something of a perilous position. In this paper, I have examined some of the framing hypotheses of Levy's argument in Mesocosm. The comparative theory of caste and kingship, which I have presented elsewhere, which in papers we have discussed already, seems to me to require a certain adjustment of Levy's concepts in order to make full sense of the extraordinarily rich ethnography he provides. While this might seem to be a critical and possibly arrogant enterprise, I hope it will be seen rather as an attempt to square Levy's portrayal with recent efforts to come to a more satisfactory understanding of caste than that left us to by Dumo. And you see, this paper is being written in 1997. Irfan Habib's paper is being written in 1997. So people had kind of come to a conclusion that yes, casteism is not really rigid and it has nothing to do with Hinduism, etc. But politics forced academics, or they just ignored those academics, to go on with their Dumontian view. Levy's analysis of Bhaktapur goes far beyond anything we have currently available on the ritual cosmology and associated social organization of a complex Hindu settlement. It is a truly remarkable achievement. That's the end of the paper. I'll see a few comments and then go offline. This is a short live stream today. Notes में कुछ important है क्या? Fraser. Okay. See also James Fraser's account in the Golden Bough. In Travancore, when a Raja is near his end, they seek out a holy Brahman who consents to take upon himself the sins of the dying man in consideration of the sum of 10,000 rupees. Thus prepared to immolate himself on the altar of duty as a vicarious sacrifice for sin, the saint is introduced into the chamber of death and closely embraces the dying Raja, saying to him, "O king, I undertake to bear all your sins and diseases. May your highness live long and reign happily." Having thus, with a noble devotion, taken to himself the sins of the sufferer and likewise the rupees, he is sent away from the country and never more allowed to return. Genius, Declan Quigley. Let's check some comments now. यही तो है जिंदगी दिव्या. Yeah, Divya. My favorite is Irfan Habib and Quigley. I'm divided between Quigley and Irfan Habib. I saw a video where a Dalit activist was saying that melted glass was melted. Yeah, melted glass, melted gold. ऐसा बहुत कुछ. Melted gold तो Game of Thrones में था. मैं उसके साथ confuse कर रहा हूँ. Yeah, there are these accusations. There's years back in the days by Brahmins. I just want to know heat mantra. Now, it might have happened sometimes as some punishment. It was happening every day for no fucking reason. कोई और काम धंधा नहीं है. कोई बैठ के सिर्फ glass melt करेगा और डालते रहेगा किसी के कान पे. Rather do a podcast on some portions of Farsi Majumdar's book on 1857 uprising. अच्छा, I have not read it. I'm more interested in Savarkar's 1857 book. कभी पढ़ेंगे तो फिर discuss होगा. Why is it so significant? Like Savarkar's is significant because it's Savarkar writing about the unity of India and stuff. How all Hindus and Muslims contributed and the brilliance of his writing skills. Okay, but what has R.C. Majumdar said, I don't know. Yeah, why is it a narrative changing? That's what I don't know. Yeah, so Buddhadev has gifted the book Anthem by Ayn Rand, which will arrive on Saturday, and we'll discuss in a marathon live stream. It won't need to be a marathon, of course, because it's just 80 pages. Goddank is saying it will take about $100 million and a year for us to develop Indian ChatGPT alternative, but our people will not, which is why Abhijit Chavra is correct. India will remain mediocre. $100 million and a year for us to develop. ऐसे फालतू के गोल्स मत ही रखो जो कि होगा ही नहीं भोसड़ी के, और फिर नहीं होगा तो उसके लिए आसान उपाय है कि ठीक है गाली दे दो, नहीं we Indians are to this, we Indians are to that. Come up with solutions that can happen. I believe in libertarianism. I'm trying to convince and persuade people. I'm not saying Indians are too stupid for libertarianism. वो easy answer है. Don't know about Brahmins, but King's official did do that in my grandfather's time. Not glass stuff, but similar. King's official. हाँ, King's official है तो उसका थोड़ी काम है घूम घूम के दलित ढूंढ के उसके कान में ग्लास डाल देना. Okay then, thank you for joining the live stream, guys. Bye bye. Good night. See you at night. We'll do today's live stream reaction topic in our midnight live stream will be my first Sanjeev Sanyal interview that I ever saw, and then we'll see the second one that I ever saw, both with Shekhar Gupta, and we'll discuss how his views have come about in policy today. Thank you, guys. Bye bye.
যদি সবাই ফিরে যায় ওরে ওরে ও ভাগা সবাই ফিরে যায় যদি গহন পথে যাওয়ার কালে কেউ ফিরে না যায় তবে পথের কাটা তুই রক্ত মাখা চরণ তলে একলা দলরে তুই রক্ত মাখা চরণ তলে একলা দলরে যদি তোর ডাক শুনে কেউ না তবে একলা চলো রে যদি আলো না ধরে ওরে ওরে ও ভাগা আলো না ধরে যদি ঝড় বাদলে আধার রাতে দুয়ার দেয় ঘরে তবে বজ্রানলে আপন বুকের পাঁজর জ্বালিয়ে নিয়ে একলা চলো রে আপন বুকের পাঁজর জ্বালিয়ে নিয়ে একলা চলো রে যদি তোর ডাক শুনে কেউ না আসে তবে একলা চলো রে একলা চলো